quite a big one. So the first item is apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies this evening from Councillors Bull, Murphy, O'Brien and Sutton. We've not been notified of any substitutes tonight.
Item 2 is approval of minutes of previous meeting, but they're not available as yet, so we're missing that one. Item 3 is public participation, but there is none, I believe. Item 4 is interest. Has any member got any interest to declare on this agenda? Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Buckler.
Yeah, I just wondered if we need to declare that we're members of Matlock Town Council.
I think at this point, because it's on your register of interest, you're probably all right. I don't think you need to declare that, but we'll record that in the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is questions pursuant to Rule of Procedure number 15. I believe there aren't any. Is that correct? Yeah. So we're on to the main item, which is item 6. It's Part A of land at Bakewell Road, Matlock, proposed conversion of Fulham Market Hall, and this is for public release. But we come back to it again in item 8, where it's confidential, restricted. So I would remind everybody not to mention anything that you've read in item 8 while we're discussing this one. Okay. Steve, do you want to? Oh, Giles. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I take members through a short presentation regarding the scheme, just by way of introducing the report, I just want to introduce the project team. So, you know myself, Giles Dan, the Economic Development Manager. On my left is Mike Galsworthy, our Estates and Facilities Manager. And on my right is Chris Thomas, our Commercial Advisor from Thomas Lister Limited. So thank you, first of all, to those members that were able to attend the member briefing that we had last week. Hopefully you find that useful. This is a cut down presentation of that presentation, but it's just trying to really bring out some of the salient points with the scheme. Just briefly, by way of reminder of the what we're looking at tonight. This is the western approach into Matlock, and this is the entrance to the town centre, which I think we all probably would agree could do with some improvement. We start with the northwest elevation to the top left, the current bus bay area and Spa Villas car park. Top right, we then get into the frontage of the former unit in the corner of the building. Into the site, we're now into the bus bay area, bottom left, and then bottom right is looking back from the bus layover space into the site, and again, the bus layover area, the bus bays and the taxi rank on the site. Top left, the frontage off Bakewell Road, the M&S Food Hall next door. Top right, the entrance to the Market Hall itself off Bakewell Road, and then bottom left we have the entrance into what is currently the area that passengers wait for buses and taxis to arrive. Into the Market Hall, a large space. Behind where it says Market Hall Butchers, we have the adjoining wall with M&S, and then the service bay to the rear. Outside, just a quick image to show some of the issues we have with ponding when it rains heavily in the town centre on the bottom left. And then the protected fire escape that we must retain as part of the scheme from the side of the M&S Food Hall. I couldn't show pictures of the site without showing some of the pictures from last Monday, the recent flooding episode within the town centre. These are taken from above, from the upper deck car park, but also from inside the building. I think the key point to point out is that, as you'll see, you can see where the flood water got to with inside the Market Hall on the bottom right image, and also behind the Market Hall on the bottom left image. And just to make clear to members, as I did in the member briefing, whilst the flooding was significant within the town centre clearly and did have a significant impact on businesses, within the Market Hall itself, you're looking at flooding their floodwater ingress to approximately 4 courses of bricks, which is roughly 300 mil, which is below the proposed finished floor level of the development. The proposal is to bring the floor height to the same height as the M&S store, which wasn't flooded. Water did not get through the fire escape or the front door of M&S, but it did obviously inundate the loading bay, as we know, which is the low point on the site. So, just a brief recap of the scheme. Long site history, we've, as a council, been working on proposals for the Bakewell Road site since the original master plan for Matlock back in 2006. So 15, 16 years of work have gone in to try and deliver something. And being blunt, the market hasn't delivered a solution for this site, hence the need for public intervention. As you will all know, it's a corporate plan priority and a priority within the economic recovery plan to try and regenerate the site. And the site's also allocated within the local plan for regeneration as a mixed-use development. Retail vacancy rates have just crept above the national and regional averages. The vacancy rate, retail vacancy rate within the town centre in Matlock is currently 12.2%, which is above the national rate of 11.7%. As members will know, detailed planning consent was achieved on the 8th of February, and a decision notice, formal notice, is expected shortly. Throughout the process, we've been very keen to engage all the key stakeholders right the way through, from local ward members, MCV steering group, M&S, the head leaseholder on the building, London Metric, the county council, at each stage in the process, and hopefully local members have found that useful to be involved, and I can honestly say it's helped improve the scheme. We received an updated cost plan in early February from Greenwood Projects. So that's an independent assessment of the costs of the scheme based on the submitted plans for planning. We've also undertaken, obviously with the issues that I'll come on to in terms of cost increases, a review of the options for this project viability, external funding opportunities, including potential future opportunities such as the Levelling Up Fund, return on investment and value for money. And Chris and his team and Amion Consulting have supported us in that work. We're now at the stage of REBA Stage 4, so that's the detailed technical design of the scheme. We took the decision to progress that essentially at risk, and those costs of that work in terms of the sub-consultant team have been shared with the proposed cinema operator. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the exempt session in terms of the operator itself, but as you have seen from the information that you've received in the business case, that operator has a significant track record elsewhere in the Northwest and the Midlands. Just to put everything into context, this is from above. So this shows you the 2-screen auditoria, total of 156 seats. The toilets, which will be open to the public whilst the cinema is open. The cinema proposes to be open during April to September, roughly between 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. And then in the winter months on a reduced period, probably 4 p.m. till 11 p.m. But during school holidays and half terms and so on, that period will be for longer. So those toilets will be open to the public during that time. Northwest corner, you can see the proposed food and beverage unit with service area to the rear. And then you'll also see just where the coloured elements are. There's a proposed space for community use to the rear of the building, which was included within the planning submission and has received detailed approval as well. The other part on this slide I just wanted to note was the improvements from the county council. So those that know the site, you come in from Imperial Road, round the back of M&S, around the back of the car park, turn left, and instead of the buses going underneath the building canopy, they will pull alongside where there's a raised footway and bus lane proposed, and shelters will be sited on that footway with capacity for 9 people to be seated in each of those shelters. There will also be a further shelter, a new shelter outside the entrance to M&S on Bakewell Road. So this is just looking in a little bit more detail at the same plan, showing the auditoria and the service bay to the rear, which will have an access gate within the hoarding. You can see the fire escape from M&S coming from the dark grey area at the bottom of the slide. That's an adapted fire escape, so M&S will have their own separate fire escape from the cinema, and that relates to comments we received from M&S's fire officer in the development of the project. And then the community space, fully designed at stage 3, but will be then further designed in detail at stage 4 in support of MCV's objectives as part of the scheme. That part of the scheme requires separate fundraising, so that isn't within the costings for this evening's decision, but would require separate fundraising. But we do know what the cost of that element to shell specification would be based on the cost plan. In terms of the public realm, this has been an issue that members have quite rightly raised, as have MCV, in terms of trying to enhance the proposed treatment to go with the development. It's an aspiration and an ambition that officers share as well. The slide there shows the existing Yorkstone paving immediately adjacent to the property, which we will aim to retain as much of that as we can. The revised footway will cut off the top left corner as you see that image, as the new lay-by is brought in by the County Council. And as members will be aware from the briefing, the proposed standard treatment of the County Council to footways is tarmac. That's not our preferred treatment, but that is the standard treatment. So what we will do as part of the tender process for this scheme is to include an enhanced treatment around this development as part of the procurement process and receive tenders accordingly. And you know, bottom line is, if it's affordable, it will be delivered as part of the scheme. If it's not, the priority will be given to the development. And obviously, if we can secure external funding along the way, then that will help meet the cost of that part of the scheme. Potential phase 2 I've already mentioned. That's been developed with input from MCV steering group, and I think we can safely say we've responded to the majority of the comments that we've had on that part of the scheme. In terms of key drivers, in terms of cost increase, you'll be aware of the increase in costs from the member briefing. 3 principal areas: the improved design, both in terms of the external elevations, but also the performance of the building in terms of climate change impact, and that's been set out in detail within the climate change SPD that was submitted as part of the design and access statement with the planning application, and also with your pack tonight in terms of the full business case. The second factor is around the commissioning of a main contractor to deliver the shell works. So you'll recall that back in July, members agreed for the council to procure the building work on the site, so that the shell construction, and the operator to maintain the responsibility for the fit out. So that obviously brings with it some degree of additional cost in terms of overheads and preliminaries and so on that a main contractor would charge, but it also helps mitigate some risks in terms of the resilience of a smaller contractor, and also in terms of delivery. We've got a major operator next door, and we need to make sure that this scheme is delivered with them in mind. Thirdly, as you'll see in the image on the slide, the significant increase in construction costs over the last 14, 15 months. And I'm sure everybody will be aware how COVID and Brexit has had an impact on the industry, both in terms of materials and resources. And that's something that we all need to contend with as part of this scheme. Just on cost, to be very clear to members, the cost estimate that you've got in the Part B report is an estimate. It's a detailed estimate, and it's based on recent tender returns, current rates, but it is an estimate. And as we've made quite clear, when we go to tender on this scheme, which will be around the end of May, early June, when we get those tenders back, costs could come down, but those costs could also go up. We're in a difficult market at the moment, but we'll obviously see when we test that market, we'll see what costs come back as. The other point to note on the cost plan is that they're inclusive of fees, which are significant, as you'll have seen, but also an increased contingency budget. The QS that prepared the cost plan advised 10%. We feel a higher level of contingency is appropriate in the current market, so we've gone for 12.5%. And inflation, they advised 5%, we've gone for 6%, and that's then been agreed with the cost consultants as an appropriate and reasonable approach. We're trying to future-proof this scheme as best we can, but obviously until we've formally tested the market, we won't know the actual cost. As you'll have seen from the Part B, the cinema operator contribution, their capital contribution has gone up from the original proposal to help meet the additional costs that we all face. And there's also an agreed fixed sum for the fit-out cost, above which the proposed operator would meet any cost overrun. And that would be written into the agreement for lease and the lease that is signed on this scheme. We've also, as you'll have seen as part of the business case, reassessed the scheme against the council's investment strategy, and overall we still have a positive contribution in that regard. It still meets the requirements of that strategy. Indicative programme, I won't go through all of this, but just perhaps a couple of areas to highlight. I've already mentioned the commencement of the tender process around early June. There's then a process in terms of assessing bids and determining the proposed bidder. So when you work that through, we would potentially looking at a start on site in terms of the shell works, October, November of this year, and then the fit out commencing January, February next year. Now that should allow, there was a comment made at the briefing, which was a fair comment from Councillor Lees in terms of supply chain disruption at the moment and lead-in time for materials, but based on that programme, that should give the operator, who's obviously familiar with the market, sufficient time to make orders for the necessary supplies and equipment that they need for the building to try and mitigate the potential for delay. Climate change, high priority for the council and a high priority for officers that have been working on this scheme. As I've already mentioned, that we've looked closely at the scheme, and we went through the SPD assessment with Joe Hill, our climate change officer, with the architect and with colleagues to try and ensure that the scheme did everything it could in terms of climate change mitigation. And I can say that that process was a really useful exercise, because it identified things that we could do within reason, within cost constraints, to improve the design, and MCV steering group's input on that has also been very helpful. I won't go through all of these points, but the design incorporates measures to try and improve natural light, so we have high-level windows and lots of glazing within the design to try and throw light deep into the rear of units, and obviously various measures to improve the opportunity for natural ventilation. The mechanical ventilation and heating includes a heat pump, run aircon system and ventilation system, which will comprise cassettes that will go into the auditoria and into the foyer of the cinema, and LED efficient lighting throughout the scheme as well. We've also thought about sustainable travel, so we've got provision for cycle parking on the District Council's land adjacent to Spa Villas car park. We've increased the tree planting on the site. You'll see that there are 3 trees at the moment, all in poor condition, one of which is dead. We're replacing those and adding 3 further trees at the rear of the site as well. And we're also trying to future-proof with ducting for an EV charging point for taxis in the future if Matlock taxi operators move towards electric vehicles in the future. In terms of the business case, we'll come on to this as part of the exempt session, but I just wanted to give some headlines really on this slide. 37,000 additional footfall within the town centre. That's a net figure. and the estimate from the operator is some 56,000 admissions to the cinema each year, increasing as the cinema gets to a stable trading position. So that net figure is a substantial figure and is based on the number of people that perhaps wouldn't normally come to Matlock. So significant numbers of additional people coming into the town centre. And that's what this scheme is about, members. It's about regeneration. It's about more people coming to the high street. Just under 18 jobs, same as before. £700,000 worth of additional town centre spend per annum from this scheme. These are the forecasts from the expert economic consultants that we've engaged on the scheme. Cost per job, 15,000. Value for money has decreased on this scheme from where we were because the costs have gone up substantially. However, we've gone from a very, very good value for money position to a good value for money position. And I think that's the point members need to take from this slide. This scheme still offers good value for money based on standard benchmarks that the consultants have considered. Just to finish, a couple of images from the design and access statement. One looking at the proposed food and beverage unit and the raised entrances that you can see there, the glass frontage that we've proposed, and signage above. And then as we move round, an image doesn't come out very well in this light, but of the cinema frontage, the readograph and the signage that's proposed for the cinema from Bakewell Road from the opposite angle next to M&S. So final slide, as I said, this is about regeneration and diversifying the high street, trying to get more people to come to Matlock. We fully acknowledge there's been a significant increase in costs on this scheme. We appreciate this is a big ask of members, but we still feel that the scheme, delivering the food and beverage unit and the cinema as a single phase, as a single scheme, is the preferred option for the council. We've looked back at the options, we've reassessed the risks, and we've updated the business case, and now it's for members to consider that as part of the exempt session. The rationale for intervention remains. We feel this is what Matlock needs. And despite COVID and 2 episodes, if not 3, in the last 2 years, 2 months in terms of flooding, we still have an operator that wants to come to Matlock. We know the problems on the high street aren't going to go away, and Matlock simply needs a lift, and we hope that this scheme will do that. So should members approve additional funding requests that we're making this evening, officers will progress the scheme to the next stage, which is a full tender, and then come the summer we will know the actual costs. So I'm going to stop there, Chair, and myself and the project team will take questions.
Thanks very much, Giles. Councillor Burfoot. Councillor Purdy.
Question, and I'd like to come back to debate, obviously. It's an unknown, probably, Chris and Giles and Mike. Thanks very much, and Steve, for your efforts on this. It's frightening when you think, going back 15 years is the lifetime of my council work here. Are there any strong signs that the war in Ukraine will affect this project from the supply chain or costs in this country?
I'll probably just come in first, and then Mike might want to add, Councillor Purdy. It's probably a little early to say, to be honest. It's something that we're very conscious of. We know things like fuel prices are already going up as a result. So there could be a knock-on on things like material costs and so on. But I think at this stage, we just don't know the answer to that question. We need to see how things are monitored. But I think when we come to a tender process and tender responses, that's when we'll have a better understanding.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, if I may raise them. I do appreciate, incidentally, that this project has been around for years and discussed many, many times, but I don't think the desire to execute it now should lead to us sending it through on the nod, as it were. So I'm going to ask questions, even though that perhaps the answers may be fairly straightforward and obvious, as it were. For me, the most contentious matter is still the increasing cost, and of course the consequent extension of the payback period. So I'd like to ask for some reassurance from you, Giles, if I may, or possibly Steve as well, just how resilient are these figures, and the 6.21% investment return on our investment. Is there any sense that these and this may be affected by the regeneration of the whole area here? For me, this area where this project is taking place is still not the most commercially buoyant. It's not in its best state, as it were. You know, we've still got the closure of Wetherspoons here, and the pub almost immediately opposite. How much reliance and resilience do these figures have? That's the first question. So it's really about the commerciality, the financial aspect, shall I say, of it to begin with.
Thanks, Councillor Ratcliffe. I'll kick off, and then Chris, I'm sure, will add to what I say. We've taken a hard look at the scheme again from where we were 18 months ago when we first brought this to members. We think the figures which Chris and the team has produced are robust. We've obviously got an increased proposed rent from the cinema operator, so that is agreed, and that's subject to 5 yearly rent reviews upwards. In terms of the business rates calculations, they've been informed by discussions with our revenues team, those projections. In terms of car parking income, that's based on discussions with our car parking team and are considered a conservative estimate. And in terms of the food and beverage unit, Chris will come in on this, but compared to some of the other rents that we're aware of on Bakewell Road, again, we think that's a fairly conservative estimate of what we might achieve in that location. And two things I think support that. One is it's next door to a cinema, and the type of use we're trying to attract to that location is the type of use that works well next to a cinema. So it's people that want to go for a bite to eat that aren't going to be there for 2 or 3 hours, but want a meal in an hour and a half, and then go into the cinema to watch a film. And we've also got M&S, very close by as well. So in terms of an attractive location to attract an operator, we think it is one, even though it's on the edge of the town centre. You mentioned the former Wetherspoons pub just down the road. There is a new operator for that in place. They are fitting out at the moment. They've obviously been delayed because of the flood, and unfortunately they've had to take the floor up and put the floor down again. That work is underway, and they're going to open shortly. Another bar has just opened in the last 2 weeks on Dale Road as well. So there are some positive signs in the town centre. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the current site?
I think just having looked at other cinema operations across the Midlands, we are seeing a number of operators that very specifically trade around cinemas, and they are an attractor of a very specific area of business, which Charles mentioned. People who are looking for food or drinks on to suit the cinema schedule, and we've, in advance of marketing, the cinema operator has introduced one party who has expressed interest. I mean, we're not at a point where the site is being marketed, but the signs are encouraging, and we think the projections we have put forward in terms of income and incentives are very realistic.
What you've just said actually leads me to my second question, which is the, if you like, the kernel of the investment here, which is the creation of a town centre cinema with two screens. But it's the cinema aspect, really, that has brought out the risk factor, the failure of the cinema, the possibility of that occurring over the next 15 years. Again, how reliant on you are the investigations that you carried out into to this, given the fact that there is undoubtedly a huge increase in home entertainment, the number of streaming channels available now to people to take their entertainment in the comfort of their own homes. Do you still feel that this type of entertainment has a long-lasting quality to it that, again, will produce the financial returns that are predicted?
I'll kick off again, Councillor Ratcliffe, and bring Chris in. It's a fair question, and I think it's one that, again, officers have thought long and hard about. I think from my perspective, I think my sense and the research that we've done is that where there's been an impact on cinema operators, it's been more so in terms of larger multiplexes. That's where there's been a greater impact as a result of COVID. I think we've got to remember that what's proposed for Matlock is more of a boutique style cinema. It's more of an experience. You can have a glass of wine while you're watching a film. That's what we're aiming for in Matlock, and those types of cinemas have fared better than others elsewhere in the country. I think the other thing that I'm sure Chris will come on to is, and we can't go into too much detail just in this part of the meeting, but the track records of the directors that operate the other cinemas who we're talking to in terms of Matlock, all 4 of those cinemas have survived and are starting to see visitors returning in good numbers. And I think that's probably as much confidence as we can bring to this meeting tonight. We can't, look ahead 5-10 years and predict the future, but based on what we know and where we are now, we think this has got a good chance of success. And if we didn't think that, we would say that to members.
If I may very quickly return, Chair, I don't want to take too pessimistic view on this, obviously. And incidentally, my own ward, my own town, has an extremely successful town cinema, as you know, that offers refreshments too, as well as the screening, and it doubled too as a community venue. So I do see the value in this, of course, but nevertheless, I think the question has to be asked, and you don't need to give me any details at all. Just tell me that it has been considered, possible alternative uses if you do get some catastrophic failure in the trading of the cinema.
Yes, Councillor Wright, we have given consideration to that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. A very simple question, and that is about the prospect, the timescales for the cinema to be built. If we're going out to tender in June, but we're expecting building work to start in, say, October, did you say? Then that would only allow us 4 months, is it, between July, August, September, October to complete contract negotiations and get the contractor in. And as I understand it, there's a delay in, although there is a forward order book, I should say, in the building industry at the moment, which means that they're not necessarily starting work immediately after winning projects. Has this been taken into consideration in the project plan? Thank you.
If I could answer that one, Chair. So the tender programme that we've alluded to in the report is a programme that's been developed in conjunction with the procurement section at the County Council, who are partnering us on procurements at the moment, on major procurements, and the timescales that we've got in terms of the tender going out in either late May or early June, and then coming back within the normal tender timescale, does allow time to commence with the appropriate sort of lead-in times in October. Now, obviously, as has been alluded to, we're in difficult, strange circumstances at the moment, and we're not going to know absolutely for sure until the tenders come in. But what we have done is made sure that by working with quantity surveyors, professional quantity surveyors, we've got projections of costs, which are really from the end of last month and the start of this month. So a lot of the movements in the market in terms of costs have been taken into account by the cost advice that we've got. Obviously, there's been big movements in construction prices as a result of COVID, Brexit, and other factors over the previous sort of 12 to 18 months. But the figures that we've got are from really just last month, and they do take into account trends in the market. But as is made clear in the report, this is subject to tender, and these are forecast costs, and also it's a forecast lead-in period as well. And until we actually get the tenders in, we're not going to know absolutely for sure on the start date and the costs. But the advice that we've had is to make sure that the specification is as tight and as clear as possible. And this is part of the REBA Stage 4 process that we're going through to get a very clear specification with not a lot of room for manoeuvre. So it's very clear what contractors are pricing for and what they're going to be expected to deliver. There's not any room for any design and build in this. It is going to be a straight specification and a traditional tender. So that removes some of the risks, but as we've said and is clear in the report, there are risks because we've got to go to the market.
Have you actually talked to builders about the timescales that they would have for starting work? Because I mean, I've done this. I've got a job that I want doing, and I've had timescales quoted to me of quoting from now, starting work in September, quoting now, starting work in 2023, mid 2023. One of them was quoting now, starting work in 2025. So I mean, the building industry is a bit busy at the moment.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, yes, it is, and I mean we will be going out to open tender. Some construction companies have got, as you say, a very full order book, and they're picking and choosing what projects they go for. But there are other companies, tend to be smaller operators, but not necessarily all smaller operators that are interested in this type of work and are still looking at projects. So we're not going to know until we fully go out to the market, but we expect that there will be interest, and we expect that there will be some tenderers that can deliver within the timescale that we're looking for.
Councillor Buttle.
Yes, thanks very much. I've got a couple of questions. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a successful project. I lived in Headingley for a while, and we had 3 cinemas within walking distance, and I know that that is just joy. It really is a great thing to be able to just pop out to the cinema. You know, just at the spur of the moment, oh yeah, we'll go out. So yeah, I'm massively in favour. I think it's going to make Matlock loads better. I've got 3 questions. First one's a bit technical. Will we be doing a BREEAM assessment on the sustainability of the build? Second question, is there any possibility that we will be able to ask the operators to extend the toileting hours to wider times? So like, for example, from 9 till 9 or something like that, whatever whatever their schedule. And the third one's a bit more, a bit trickier really. When we had the flooding, what stopped it from coming another 6 inches higher? Really, what is it? You know, was it the fact it stopped raining? And if it was the fact that it stopped raining, then maybe we should start thinking about providing some sort of extreme drainage. I don't know. I'd like to know a little bit more about what actually stopped the water from coming up any further. Those are the 3 questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Buttle. If I start with the last one first, in terms of flooding, I think we're in a situation where in Matlock we've obviously got a difficult situation with flooding generally within the town centre. It's not just related to this particular site. The situation is that, as we know, surface water comes down from the hillside. It gets to a point where the river's high and it can't discharge, and therefore we have the flooding situation in the town centre. So, what would happen if it had gone 6 inches higher? What would have stopped that? To a certain extent, it is the amount of rainfall that occurs. What I would say is that we've had a town centre issue 3 times in the last 2 years, 2 months, approximately. And on each of those occasions, if the cinema floor was raised to the proposed floor level that we've got identified within the scheme. And don't forget, this is a cinema, so we've got tiered seating, and we can only go so high with the floor, or you start to lose the back row of the 2 auditoria. Then the floor height would have coped just with the water that was around the building. So, you know, none of us are flooding experts, but I think what we're trying to do here is mitigate as best we can for similar incidents in the future. And we think by raising the floor height as proposed, and those that are familiar with the building, that height is somewhere between 300mm increase and up to half a metre increase is required, because the building slopes in different parts of the floor. So I think with that key mitigation, but also having things like sockets coming down the walls instead of from the floor, the height of units and equipment off the floor, they're all measures that we can introduce as part of the scheme. We've made it clear to the architects that, you know, building flood resilience into the design is crucial, and the operator's very pragmatic. We've had, you know, them on site in recent weeks to you know, look at the building and what would happen in the event of a flooding situation, and they're very pragmatic. It's a case of, okay, we know that the river's getting high, that there could be a flooding incident. We need to have a flood barrier, demountable flood barriers in front of each of the exit and entry points in the building. We get everybody out and we deal with it as best we can. And I think that's being reasonable. That's where we are.
Yeah, sounds enough. Thank you.
We think we're doing what we can with that building, with the use that's proposed. In terms of operators, the operator extending the hours of opening, I mean, we can certainly have a conversation, but I think we've got to bear in mind that they are opening, their staff will open the building. If it's a 10 o'clock, showing, 10 a.m. showing, they will open the building at 9:30 or whatever they would normally do. I think we've got to be careful about asking them to have the building open when there's nothing happening in the building for people to use the toilets. I personally think that for half the year, if that building is open between 10 a.m. and 11 p.m., and that's providing toilet facilities in that part of the town centre that aren't there now, that's a pretty good offer, to be honest. They don't have to open to the public, they've offered to do that, and I think that's a good offer. So in terms of Briam, Mike, do you want to pick that one up?
Yes. So in terms of Briam, I mean, this is something that we'll take advice from Latham's architects about that. And obviously it's a standard that we'd like to try to reach, but with the proviso that we need to take into account that this is basically a reordering of an existing building, in that we're not starting with a green or brownfield site and putting a building on there. The building already exists, and we are in effect rearranging the walls within that building to form the cinema, the food and beverage units, and ultimately the community space. So there are certain constraints that go with that, because we don't have a roof as such. The roof is a car park; it's already in use. So in terms of the environmental factors that would be advantageous for Bream, we're looking at those, but we have got to bear in mind that there are, as it becomes apparent in this meeting and in the report, we are on a very tight sort of cost timescale. We've talked about the risks of tender and that sort of thing, so we haven't got a sort of blank checkbook to pay for everything we might like. What we do want to do is to do the very best that we can do within this scheme, within the constraints of the existing building.
Yes, thanks very much.
Yeah.
I realise that we are working with serious constraints, and but it's nice to know that we are looking at these things as we go along to make sure that we're not missing any tricks. Thank you.
Councillor Buckler.
Some of the questions that I had were, a couple of points that I had have just been answered. I'm really pleased to see the work on the climate change risk assessment improvements. In the light of the recent IPCC report, and particularly the Climate Change Commission report, which said that we're not doing enough to make buildings last long enough in response to climate change, particularly, again, relating to the flooding, are we happy with what we're doing? Note in the second paragraph, in second point in paragraph 9.3, which is that there is a potential for more comprehensive scheme for the site, subject to external funding, which could include measures to support the council's low carbon agenda in the longer term. Are we still looking for external funding, or is that not happening?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we are. We are looking at external funding opportunities for the site. We met with local ward members recently, and there's one or two options that we talked to them about exploring. We've obviously had members had a meeting last week about things like the Levelling Up Fund, and obviously a decision is still to be taken on which town or towns might go forward for that scheme. But certainly, if external funding came alongside district council funding, then we can do more. That's where we are, and we as officers, we're happy to look at other measures if they're deliverable. Obviously, the town council is looking at things as well in terms of renewables on that site, and that's something we'll keep talking to the town council about.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Giles, for just enlightening members in relation to the two new public houses tenants that we are. One we have, one still trying to get sorted out. Just going on from Councillor Buttle's question, the toilets are going to be open to all, because I've received a number of enquiries locally that they're concerned about in the late evening times, and if it was open till 11 o'clock, it would sort it out. But the toilets will be open to non-patrons of that organisation. You know, the cinema. That's the first question.
Yeah, that's the discussion we've had with the operator.
That's good. That's good. The other question is in relation to. Obviously, I've got some concerns about flooding, and you're saying that it didn't go into Marks and Spencer's on this occasion, and I'm aware that climate change has been factored into the actual calculations, and the Environment Agency are saying that there's going to be a significant rise in river levels, even if we do achieve our climate reduction targets. Have we? It says on item on page 6, it says the existing drains and sewers serving the site have been surveyed and remedial works completed. One of the biggest issues in relation to these properties along there are that the water comes up into through the sewers. Can you give me an assurance that all the drains will have no return valves within that premise? I like the idea that you put in the plugs higher and everything like that, but a lot of it comes up through the floors. So have we got no return valves throughout that area? Thank you very much.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, so we're at the moment, part of the Stage 4, REBA Stage 4 works is that we are having a design done for the drains and sewers for the site. So we have at the moment, the way the building's configured at the moment is obviously it's a covered market hall. So it was designed as a flood resilient building in that, you know, it's got a stone floor, all of the power comes from above, and you know, it floods in times of flooding, and then it drains very quickly away, and then it's, you know, you could literally have had a market in there at the end of last week, even though it was underwater on the Monday. Obviously, the way the building is configured at the moment, it has as water rises around the site, it can just flow straight into the site, and there's drains within, open drains, because it was designed to be washed down internally as a market hall, and at the moment the water will surcharge back up those. Those will all be sealed, and the new drainage system will need to protect against surcharging back in. So we've got that design will take care of that, and then we also have the building will be much more flood protected than it is now, so the water won't as easily find its way in. We're going to have a solid floor at a higher level and flood barriers as well. So on a predicted flood that we know about in advance, we can put those measures in place. So that, combined with the protection on the drains, should protect against those factors. There is a limit, though, as to how far we can go. We can't keep raising the floor, because then we get into, obviously, cinema use, tiered seating. We get to there is a limited height in there, and that's what we factored into the design as it is at the moment. I think the other point to make about the surface water, a lot of this flooding is due to surface water coming from the higher areas of Matlock, as you know, and then surcharging up the drains there and finding the lower point, the lowest point being Marks and Spencer's loading bay. Then it works its way back and into Bakewell Road, and if doors are open and things are at a lower level, it will get in there. As a result of this scheme, we're not introducing any more surface water flow into the system than already exists, because, as I said before, we are fitting out, in effect, an existing building. The roof is already there and it's already draining, and the same amount of water will be going down the same drains after this development as prior. There is potential longer term for some sort of wider flood mitigation measures to deal with water coming down the hill down this system, but that isn't the result of this scheme. That's a wider issue that obviously is something that that can be looked at, but it's not part of this particular scheme.
So what we're saying, in effect, and thank you for that, because it's reassuring that what you're doing is you sort of like securing the curtilage within the building, which is important. Outside the building, there are basically two areas. There's one on Dale Road that's a low point, and where you said the loading bay. Obviously, but you are working with the county council to, I mean, they've done an assessment of the whole area. Are we on at them? Because that's what we need to be to get the pumping, an attenuation area, and also a pump, some form of pump to get that up this. Because just going on from it's from Giles's comment, it is this area of town, the Bakewell Road area, that has been impacted 4 times in the last 3 years. So are we actively in the ear of the Derbyshire County Council to get them to try and get some levelling up funding? Thank you.
If I come back on that, Chair, we've since the Community Renewal Fund was launched last spring, we put a submission together, which wasn't ultimately successful, unfortunately, but that included some work with the County Council to do essentially modelling of surface water flow that could enter the system, the combined sewer underneath Bakewell Road, which was to supplement some work that Severn Trent were already planning to do. So even though we didn't get the external funding, we still worked with the County Council's local lead flood team to persuade them to find some alternative funding, which they have, and they started that modelling work around Christmas time, and we expect to get some results from that probably early summer. What we asked them to do as part of that commission with the consultants that they've engaged was to do some what was called early optioneering work. So to work out, okay, so based on the modelling of surface water volumes and flow within that part of the town centre, what are your options in terms of dealing with that amount of water? So that work is taking place in terms of the modelling work. That's taking place now, and we've asked for an update from the County Council as to how that's going, because we want to be in a position, if and when a funding opportunity comes along, that we've got some evidence base to try and put something together to pursue that. Now, that sounds very easy, but it's a complex task. It's not the district council's responsibility to deal with it, but if there is an opportunity to play a part in that with the layover part of the site or whatever it might be in terms of a solution, then I think that conversation could be had. And it's been an issue that has come up in terms of the levelling up fund work. But the difficulty that we may have is any future timescales. So if the fund opened up very soon, we wouldn't have a scheme that we could put forward for funding because the modelling work hasn't been completed. If the fund opened up in 6 months' time, we've got a fighting chance. But clearly, we need to be pushing at others like the Environment Agency and the County Council to look at all funding opportunities that might be available. It's not just down to the council, this council, to deal with it.
Councillor Statham.
Thank you, Chair. One of the biggest pitfalls and failures of the market hall itself was the heating in there. In the report it mentions a ground source heat pump and air conditioning. Is that the most cost-effective way to heat the place? Have you considered any other sort of systems? Thanks.
Through you, Chair, it's not a ground source heat pump. That was something that we did look at, but was cost prohibitive, unfortunately. But it is a heat pump. I'm not an expert on the differences between the two, but it is a heat pump based solution. That was something that we engaged with the proposed operator around, and they sought independent quotations on solutions for the site. And the system that's proposed is following a contractor visit to the site and looking at something that's affordable, basically, but also is energy efficient.
if I might just add to that, we're also having the M&E design sense checked by Leisure Energy, who are our energy consultants, who have been responsible for a lot of the decarbonisation work that's going on across our other properties, including this one. So there's an M&E consultant that's produced a design, which is basically ceiling mounted cassette units that heat and cool the space as required. The guidance we're getting is that is the most efficient type of system for a building of that size, but there will be an evaluation of that. So we're not just taking as read what is put in. We're getting that checked by a specialist who's got no, that they can tell it like it is, really, and tell us if there is a more efficient way of doing it or otherwise. So we are having that second level of check.
Very good. Thank you.
I've no further questions. Oh, Councillor Wakeman.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much. It's a good report, and it'll bring some life back into that part of the town that's been dead for a long time. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As usual, very comprehensive report. Thank you very much, Giles. 5.1, you've arrived at a figure, a very precise figure for jobs created. I think it's a very modest figure. I think it will be probably half as much again, or maybe even double that again. Just for reassurance, how did you arrive at that figure of 17.8 full-time jobs?
Thanks, Councillor Morley. It's part of the assessment that we've done with Amiens Consulting. It's essentially a figure based on the number of expected employees within the cinema and also the number of expected employees within a food and beverage unit of 2,000 square feet, plus indirect job creation within the town centre as a result of the £700,000 worth of extra spend that is anticipated as a result of that development. So when you put those three things together, and then you take away very technical things like displacement and leakage of those gross figures, you then get down to 17.8 jobs as a result.
I have no further questions, so we'll move to debate. Councillor Burford.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I think this is a very impressive report, and I'd like to pay tribute to Giles Dunn, particularly for the enormous amount of work he's carried out on this scheme over several years now, and also to Mike Goldsworthy, of course, and Steve Capes, and to Chris Thomas as well, has been involved for the recent past. I think it's an exciting scheme, as I say. But we've come a long way to get to this point, as Giles pointed out in his overhead presentation. And we had the town centre master plan in 2006. In fact, before that, when I was on the town council, we had a very go-ahead, proactive town clerk called Margaret Wagstaff, who worked with Paul Wilson when he was director of planning on various seminars. We had a health check, we had countless seminars, workshops, and public consultation exercises. And that was when probably I was first aware of the idea of a cinema for this for the market hall part of the town centre. Because nothing else was obvious that you could do with that, with such a dark, dank, cavernous building like that underground without any. Well, it was very depressing if you went to the market, or if I can remember having jumble sales there, or hoping at jumble sales, and it was rather depressing, to be honest. And you had to wear a thick coat in the middle of the summer; it was so cold. So I think this is an excellent use for the site. Obviously, we had other. What sort of spurred it on really was in 2013 when the Matlock Community Vision was formed out of the old Bakewell Road group, that I was a member of as well, founder member of that. And that really brought in Professor Brian Ford of Nottingham University and his wife, who became secretary of the group and did an awful amount of work. And Brian Ford involved his students at the university as well, the master's students who came along and did several, well, very imaginative presentations, we say, and schemes that they drew up. It was professionally, I mean, it was part of their coursework, and it was marked as such. I was partly involved in assessing the work that they produced, actually. And they came up with all sorts of ideas, which were very inspiring to those of us who were working with them. But obviously, they were somewhat far-fetched, I suppose, in terms of the financial capability of this council or anyone else in this area, but there were some interesting ideas.
and did a lot of research as well along with it. So I think one thing about that particular scheme, that particular project with Professor Ford, it was supposed to be they were environmental architects, I suppose, or doing a course on environmental architecture. And so they were looking at sustainability, particularly in terms of heat and all the rest of it, in terms of the schemes they put forward. So, but this cinnamon food beverage business development, I think, needs to be seen as just a catalyst for the regeneration of the wider town centre, as Giles has highlighted. As it's only a first phase, of course, of our aspirations locally for further development of this area and joining council-owned land. I think you've got to remember it is council-owned land. It's not we're not leasing it from anyone else. It is our land, and it's just a pity in a way that because of perhaps the intransigence or willingness of Trent Barton to discuss a more wide-ranging scheme with us over the years, that it's limited to this particular area at the moment. But hopefully that can change in the future. As for the considerable cost increase estimated now compared to pre-COVID times, my only significant criticism of the report's recommendation, and obviously I'm thanking the officers for this report, is that it's taken over 8 years from the formation of MCV, that's Matlock Community Vision, to get to this point. And countless meetings and correspondence, not to mention frustration in all the meetings that we've held over that time. I think probably if we'd perhaps grasped the nettle sooner, the cost wouldn't have been, or the cost increases wouldn't have been anything like what they are today. But we are where we are, and this is an exciting day. I think it's D-Day really tonight, I suspect, because I hope that all members will support this project. It's going to be a very prestigious scheme for not just for the town, but obviously for potential tenderers who put a bid in for this. And I think Giles, I think, was alluding to the fact that it's not just a building scheme on Matlock Bank somewhere. It is a prestigious scheme in the centre of the town, and I think that will attract building firms who are specialists in that kind of work, perhaps. And obviously a high-quality scheme is what we want. And I'm glad that during the consultation exercises, because Giles, as he's also alluded to, Giles has constantly organised little discussion workshops with Matlock members. So we've been very grateful for those. And of course, that's when we went through the exercise of looking at the first schemes that were put forward by, whether there's an architect, I don't know. I think we had a lot of criticisms of the design of that. So I think when Giles and his colleagues decided to go to Latham's for perhaps more imaginative advice and better design quality, that's when we started to move forward and with the scheme that we've got now. So I'm confident it will pay dividends for Matlock's future prosperity with increased footfall, as we've heard, and spending in the town centre. And of course, the jobs that we've just been hearing about, the 17.8 new jobs. So that is going to be a fantastic bonus. So I just hope that members will support it. In fact, I'd like to move the recommendation if possible, please.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy for Councillor Barefoot to move it, but I think it's best, Martin, if we agree to move recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 7.
Yes.
Because 6 is exempt.
That's not fine, yes.
Okay, so I'm happy to second Councillor Barefoot's move, Chair, and I won't repeat much of what he said. I think the criticism of 8 years, I'm not fully au fait with that detail, but I think it's the fact that the right owner, Belper Cinema and whatever other towns he's involved with, came along. And I've said it before, and I do recommend it again. I know Councillor Hobson goes to Belper. If you want to see the quality of what we're going to get in Matlock, visit Belper Cinema. It's a wonderful experience. And that therefore means, I think, enormous thanks once going to the owner. Forgive me his name, Charles. It's Mr. Are you allowed to give it? If you don't need to, don't say so.
We need to discuss that in the exam.
Don't say so. That's quite fine. Don't worry about that. I just want to make sure that it's recorded that he stayed with us on this. And I think without that, we'd be back to square one. So enormous thanks go to him. Huge thanks as well to Matlock Vision, because Giles, when you put it up on the screen like that, my life flashed from the day I walked in there 15 years ago, and here we are today. And as Martin said, we've had enormous obstacles in the way, Summerfield, Trent Barton and so forth. So you have to speculate to accumulate. It's a wonderful saying and it's correct. And here we have a golden opportunity now to enhance that part of Matlock. And I can tell you also, when you come out of the Belper Cinema, all the restaurants are full. And so you can imagine the build-up of the economy in Matlock in the evening. That's going to add to the taxes, that will probably add to the hotel stays. We know with Matlock Bath Illuminations, for example, that lifts the economy in the whole of the Derbyshire Dales. So I think that, you know, we should be behind this fully. I've said before, and I'll repeat it again, our group's fully behind this chair. Yes, we're worried about any extra costs. I'm not so much worried about the flooding, because I'm happy with what the officers have said, but I can assure the members that I am putting strong political pressure on. I, in fact, had a long conversation with James Jameson, chair of the LGA, over last weekend, and he's going to put pressure on the government from the chair of the LG perspective about the flooding and the repetitiveness of it. I'm also aware of, inverted commas, plans we've got if we get the LUF monies, which will seriously deal with the flooding in that part. So I'm hopeful that, you know, we'll have a go for LUF. If we're not successful, we'll have a go for more grants in the future. So more than happy to second this chair and fully behind it.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Purdy for his work on doing that, negotiating with the other parties in government and so on about mitigating some of the flood risk. I think this is an exciting opportunity, and I think it's one we should grasp with both hands. And it's one end of a bookend. There are two bookends to Matlock at the moment, the centre of Matlock at the moment. There's a cinema and there's a development of the apartment complex on the former Ford garage, and which will make that end of the town very attractive, I think, with another premium retail space made available there as well, suitably flood protected again. So we're seeing, I think, two very encouraging developments in the centre of Matlock, and let's hope that this can be implemented as quickly as it's proposed that it will be. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just following on from Councillor Ratcliffe's question, I think after 2 years of being locked down, we're all pretty much Netflixed out, aren't we? And I think the day of the boutique cinema is upon us, so I think the sooner we can get it open, the better. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of Matlock, I welcome the introduction of the cinema, and I hope it does go ahead. I think it's an excellent idea. Whoever the prospective owner or occupant, tenant of the cinema is going to be, I wish them well, and I thank them for their support and also the added income, the added cost that they have offered to put forward. However, I think what we don't need to, I mean, we're talking about Matlock very much this evening, and we've got two other large towns within our area that also, certainly one of them needs some regeneration. So I think you know, it's good for Matlock this time, but let's look forward and let's hopefully the other opportunities for other towns within our district. I do feel that we as an organisation, Derbyshire Dales District Council, should be proud of our towns within the district and the whole area. Yes, there are problems, but we should be proud, and I think this is going to benefit our organisation, the town of Matlock, but it'll also benefit the wider district. I mean, I've been to Belper and frequented the odd pub, and then gone for a meal, and I've spent money in that town. I want the people from Belper and Nottingham, once the trains are running properly again, direct, I want them to come to Matlock and do the same, spend their pound in our town, because we have gone through a heck of a lot over the last three years with the flooding, and we deserve a good leg up. So I encourage, when it's open, people come to Matlock and spend their pound. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank everybody on the team that's worked so hard. We only had to look at the timescale to see how long this project has been sort of waiting to get as far as this. It's hard to get to this point. Supporting the economic regeneration of Matlock Town Centre is really important, but this will have a benefit for all our wider area. You know, the people of Bakewell will come down, the people from the villages will come down. I've got two little friends at Bakewell, Rosie and Charlie, who would love to come down to the cinema here. We can't speak too highly about how hard everybody's worked with this. We had the workshop the other night, and as Giles has already alluded to, Councillor Stuart Lees, he has the benefit of his building experience and also cinema experience, so he brought something else to the table. You know, we had a really good discussion. I must go back to something that Councillor Radcliffe said a bit earlier on about, as I don't know, was it the word rubber stamping something, Mike, or not asking, but I think we all ask lots of challenging questions, don't we here? We do indeed, and we get our answers. So I hope everybody will support the scheme. Thank you.
No further speakers. It has been moved and seconded. Can we move to the vote, please? And just to remind you, it is for recommendations 1 to 5 and 7. Recommendation 6 will be considered with the part B. Thank you. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So on to item 7. I move for the exclusion of public and press. Can I have a second, please? Thank you. All in favour?